Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Eastleigh Local Area Committee. We're picking up from where we left off yesterday, and I want to begin tonight's meeting by thanking all of those who contributed yesterday. The passion and commitment that was shown, regardless on which side people were on, that really was democracy in action. I want to thank Andy Granfield and Craig Morrison also, who I'm sorry wasn't able to join us yesterday, but the input that they have made over the past, well, what's nearly 2 years into this planning application, and their contribution yesterday was really very, very professional and first class. I want to thank all the officers who provided the support on the economy, environmental health, and climate. Democratic Services, Laura and Nikki, the absolutely amazing job that they have done in planning and preparing for this meeting. And Legal for keeping us on the straight and narrow. And the IT team, who with calm and good humour have dealt with all of the things that have cropped up, and they've enabled literally hundreds of people from the local community to actually participate in this meeting. What I have witnessed is complete and utter professionalism, local government at its very best. And I wanted to start out by saying that this evening, because I know that the reality is that once we get to the vote later on, and the vote is in, many of you will just switch off. But local democracy doesn't work by accident. It works because of the dedication and hard work of countless people, many of whom the public never actually get to see. So I think it's really important, and I want to extend my thanks to all of the team. But clearly there is still some work left to do, and so we need to pick up our deliberations from yesterday. We heard from those people in the community who wanted to speak against the application. We heard from those people in the community, particularly the business community, who wanted to speak in support of the application. And obviously we heard from the applicant themselves. We had lots of questions throughout the day. And then after a very, very long time, we got to start the debate, but unfortunately after 14 hours we got to midnight, and we obviously had to halt things. So I would like to pass over to Andy Granfield, and to just perhaps, Andy, you could reset the scene for us before we recommence our debate.
Yes, of course, Chair. I will share a slide, and hopefully that will be useful to start summarising where we were. I won't take very long in talking this through. It's not going to be going over everything again, but it's just refreshing people's mind as to where we got to and what the key issues are. So hopefully you should have a slide come up on your screen. Excellent, thank you. So just to recap, this is a planning application for an extension of 164 metres to the existing runway at Southampton International Airport. As part and parcel of that runway extension, there's provision for a new blast screen at the northern end of it, a 3-metre high blast screen. There's also the removal of a bund along the western boundary, and that will help to facilitate an expanded car park and also the realignment of Mitchell Way. Now, in terms of the various issues that we talked through, I think I ended pretty much on this slide, which brings us to what's called the planning balance. And I thought it'd be useful to use this as a summary tool to go through to reappraise everybody as to where we got and what the key issues are. So with any planning application, we do need to start with the adopted local plan, and that is the local plan for 2001 to 2011, and look at whether the development in principle is acceptable in accordance with that local plan. We established yesterday that there are some conflict with adopted policies. So policy 1CO is a countryside policy, and this type of development isn't something that is supported by 1CO as a policy. However, this is a designated site within the countryside as an airport. It's protected by policy 115E of the adopted local plan, which supports the aviation development in this location. However, that policy 115E is a criterion-based policy, and the fifth criteria of that doesn't support runway extensions. So there is a conflict with that adopted local plan policy. There is also a part conflict with policy 2CO, which seeks to protect the green gap, a strategic gap to the east of Eastleigh. And there is a conflict in so much that this development would have some physical reduction of that gap itself. So where you've got conflict with policy, we have to look at whether there are any other material considerations as well that need to be taken into account. And the report that was presented to members set that out in quite some detail. But one of the key material considerations that members have to take account of is national guidance, national planning guidance, which is set out in the NPPF. And where there is a conflict between national guidance and local guidance, because the NPPF was produced after the adopted local plan, that has to be given very significant weight. The NPPF has an overriding presumption in favour of development, and as we set out yesterday, there is a paragraph within that, paragraph 104, which supports development at airfields, but it also requires local authorities to take account of the environmental, economic and social issues associated with any development in such locations. So when we look now at the material considerations, we have to balance these up in forming a decision. And the reports and the presentations yesterday went through that and set out what the issues are, both for and against the development, how some policies support it and some policies were against this development. And therefore, forming a decision, we have to undertake what's called the planning balance to come out with a recommendation and a decision. So one of the material considerations that members have to take into account is national aviation policy, which supports making best use of runways and suggests as part of that we have to take into account not only the environmental issues but also the economic benefits that are derived from aviation development. It also very much recognises that the aviation industry does have an impact on the climate as a result of emissions, but it's very clear within that guidance that that should be considered at a national and international level, because it's that scale of impact where harm can be created. It is also recognising that at a regional and local level, the control of those emissions are somewhat out of the control of local authorities. However, there are environmental impacts that national policy recognises and needs to be taken into account. So running through some of the direct issues that members considered yesterday, as I said, the National Planning Policy Framework sets out three strands: social, environmental and economic, which is set out on the screen here. And they've been colour-coded to give an indication as to where there's a positive, or orange where there's an adverse impact, and red where there's a significant adverse impact. So running from left to right, we've got, from a social perspective, we've heard that there is an impact on human health as a result of this development. There's an impact as a result of the noise associated with it. But as set out within the report, there are mitigation strategies proposed to minimise that impact through a health strategy and a community fund. We've also explained that the council have undertaken a quality impact assessment for this development, and in terms of the processing of the decision, the council haven't prejudiced anybody as a result of the process. Looking from an environmental point of view, the impact on the climate as a result of emissions generated from planes and air traffic movements is something which featured significantly in the discussions yesterday. It is very much recognised and appreciated by all that an increase in air traffic movements of approximately from 1 million passengers to 3 million passengers does generate a significant amount of carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. That does have an impact on the environment. We also looked at some of the other issues around countryside, and that there would be a slight impact on the countryside and the gap, but not significantly harmful that we could recommend a refusal on that basis. We also acknowledge that there's air quality management areas close by to the site, which, having investigated and undertaken various surveys, the applicant has demonstrated there would be no harm to these air quality management areas. Ecology, we've looked at the various issues around protected species and also designated sites, and we concluded, having regards to the habitat regs assessment and the appropriate assessments submitted to Natural England, that there is no overriding harm to ecology as a result of this development. That is subject to a biodiversity mitigation and enhancement plan being provided. Drainage is covered via sustainable methods, and there's no objection to that, and there are no objections under hazards. There is a minimal impact on landscape, as we've established, but there are conditions recommended to improve landscaping within the area. We also established there was a significant impact as a result of noise associated with the various air traffic movements, and having regards to national aviation policy and noise assessments, we've concluded that through the introduction of a noise insulation policy, a noise contour gap, and various monitoring of that the impact from noise would be reduced from a major adverse to a moderate adverse impact. In terms of transportation, the site is very well located to the railway station at Parkway, and approximately 20% of the users of the airport are coming in through sustainable modes of transport. In terms of highway movements, the applicant has demonstrated that up to 2.45 million vehicle movements could be accommodated by the airport without causing harm to the highway network, and that is underpinned by evidence submitted to support the emerging local plan. In terms of trees, there are a number of trees, around about 13 or 15 trees on site that would be lost as a result of the car park works in particular, but they are low quality trees, and it's been evidenced that there would be no harm to trees which are protected. Whilst there is potentially some land contamination within the site just because of the historic uses that have gone there, through conditions that is not deemed to be problematic. And equally, from a heritage point of view, there are no statutory or non-statutory assets which are affected by this development. And the final strand within the NPPF is the economic strand, and it was discussed at quite length yesterday in terms of the benefits associated with this scheme, both to direct employment at the site, which has seen a reduction pre-COVID of a reduction of about 35 to 40% of employment on site. It was also evidenced within the environmental statement that the COVID impact has not been taken into account in any of the assessments, be it economic or environmental or social. It was also evidenced through the environmental statements that there would be a benefit to the local and regional economy. So all of that needs to be balanced up and a decision made by members, and the recommendation on this application is to permit it subject to the above 3 points. The first one has already been addressed as outlined yesterday. We have no objections from Natural England to the development. The second point is, if approved, then there are conditions recommended to ensure that development is acceptable. And finally, the completion of a Section 106 agreement, and we set out in quite a lot of detail yesterday what the heads of terms were that would be secured as part of that Section 106 agreement. So, Chair, the recommendation is to delegate the decision to myself as Head of Housing and Development in consultation with yourself and the Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. So, councillors, it's now our time to fully debate this issue. When we left things last night, the situation was that Councillor Bicknell had articulated the reasons why he thought he was in a position to be able to support the application. Councillor Clark had articulated his reasons why he thought that he wasn't in a position to be able to support the recommendation. And Councillor Tyson Payne had said that she was experiencing some, or I think she put it, she was looking to really be convinced. She had some concerns, and she was looking to be convinced that to agree to the recommendation. So that's sort of where we left things, but it was obviously very late and people were very tired when we opened the debate. So oh, I've already got, yep. So Councillor Tyson Payne.
Thank you very much, Chair. And last night I did speak, and to be honest, I think I rambled a bit, and I think it was late, and I don't think I really articulated where I was. And so I think it would be great if I could have this opportunity to really articulate. I'm feeling much more inclined to reject this application for the following reasons. From a climate change perspective, I kind of feel that trumps everything. I'm not saying that you couldn't find a way around it, but for me, climate change really does take precedence. I feel the noise is not well enough mitigated, and having listened to the presentations yesterday and looked a little bit more closely at some of the information, I now realise how many more properties will come into the noise that will be affected by noise that previously weren't. Air quality is clearly going to get worse if we do this. There's all sorts of technical stuff, but at the end of the day, for me, it gets worse. Traffic, the lived experience of being a resident of Eastleigh, and I'll be honest, I have moved out of Eastleigh, but that was in the last couple of weeks. As a resident of Eastleigh, Southampton Road is a nightmare. I have caught flights from Eastleigh Airport, and on one occasion nearly missed my flight with my fellow travellers because we were stuck in traffic on Southampton Road, and we were lucky to make our flight. We'd have got to Heathrow quicker. And I appreciate the traffic isn't like that all the time, but it is often on Southampton Road virtually gridlocked. I struggle to understand how adding more traffic to something that's considered overcapacity to be something that's acceptable. So that also my lived experience of being in Eastleigh is I know that there have been at least 2 council meetings that I arrived very late for. In fact, I think one, we ended up not having the meeting because the place was gridlocked and we couldn't get to the council offices. So from traffic perspective, I am not happy that more traffic will be able to do it. So, and here's my next big issue, flying. So only 43% of the population actually fly. So if we extend this, it will accommodate some of the 43% of our population who fly. But actually the climate change will impact 100% of the population. We will all be impacted by that. So is there a need to fly? Yes, I have flown on holiday in the past, and I do hope to fly again in the future, but I am already reducing the number of flights that I intend to do going forward. And I know many of my colleagues and my friends feel exactly the same, that they're changing their future lifestyles as a result of climate change. Is Flybe dead? Well, as a name, yes, it is. But I think once the pandemic is more accommodated in our natural lives, that other airlines will come in to pick up some of those routes that have been lost. Next, flying. Southampton Airport is a regional airport. It was built as a regional airport, unless somebody can change that for me. And it's about flights to the Channel Islands, to Glasgow. I used to travel for work to Glasgow from Southampton Airport. so, you know, flying within the UK boundaries and also to sort of the Channel Islands. BIA, Bournemouth International Airport, is some 30 minutes away, maybe 45 on a bad day, and it provides all of those longer flights that might be had. The COVID impact, all airports have struggled in the pandemic. The S106, section 106, I have concerns that it's not tight enough yet. I struggled with the addition into the section 106 about less than 20 air traffic movements between the hours of 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock. Initially, I thought, this is going to be much better. And then I looked at it and I thought, hang on a minute. If they hit that, that's allowing them to do up to 20 in that hour. That's 6 flights every minute, either landing or taking off. And that seems to me a retrograde step, because I can't believe that pre-pandemic there were that many flights in that hour taking off and landing. I find that difficult to believe. And I think the community fund, you know, I can't see how having noisy flights over my house and impacting my mental health can be alleviated by a community fund that provides me with some facilities. So I've rambled on for quite some considerable time, but I wanted to put some flesh around my comments from last night because of the late hour. So Chair, thank you very much. And I hand it over to you and the rest of the team. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification there, Councillor Tyson-Payne. Before we go to Councillor Mann, I just wanted to ask Councillor Bicknell and Councillor Clark, did you wish to make any sort of comments tonight on what you said last night, bearing in mind the lateness of the hour that you said it? Yep, Councillor Clark.
I spoke quite clearly last night. I stand by my points last night. I'm sure that I may speak later, but I'll let other people who haven't had a chance yet speak first.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Clark. Councillor Bicknell.
Again, I spoke quite clearly, but I'm happy to summarise for the benefit of people that might not have been in attendance last night. I'll try and remember what I said. But I actually, in summary, I looked at the policies, all the policies that Andy Granfield has mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, this debate and this presentation, and went through the policies and how the actual application as written is in adherence to the national aviation policies, the national planning policy framework, and our own saved policies, and the fact that obviously there is not one issue that can be taken alone in determining this application, that it is actually a planning balance taking all the issues into account, and that is quite clear in the presentation that Andy's just given, and also as common practice for councillors, and actually in the document that we had, planning documents. And then obviously I said last night, quite correctly, Chair, that I was minded to support the application because I could see that the climate change is something that needs to be dealt with at a national level, as per the government policies, and that I was, and the noise had been mitigated against. I also commented that there were no objections from the highway authorities, Hampshire County Council and Highways England, on traffic. And the modelling that they've done, and that they were quite happy and content that the road network could accommodate the 2.45 or up to 2.45 million vehicles up to the period of 2030. I then backed that up with all the comments that we'd received from all the businesses and how the actual airport extension would obviously support the direct and the indirect jobs from the airport, but also all the businesses that are actually set up in and around the airport and the area because of the for the airport. So that's it, sort of summary of what I actually said last night. I've put myself down to speak, to come back and add further detail and debate later on, and I'll pick up other points at that time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bicknell. So I'd now like to go to Councillor Mann, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll say a few bits and pieces. I'm not going to go over what my colleagues already have said. So I'm trying to keep out of what they've said, so and don't conflict anything. In this application, we've heard from people who are objecting to this extension, as it will have impact on the noise and pollution from the aircraft that the airlines will use. That can't be denied, and we know it's going to happen. And from the people who are supporting this application, we've had them saying why it is so important to go ahead with it. Things like it will help local economy, bring more jobs, make connectivity easier nationally and abroad for business and leisure, and will be lifeline for Channel Islands, etc. Everybody gives their reasons for objecting or supporting it. So, you know, we've had hundreds and hundreds of emails, and we've had loads of people yesterday speak as well. So we've discussed all these, that how can we help reduce noise and pollution, etc. And we've raised these questions, which how to deal with it, these problems as it brings, because we're going to have problems, we're going to have noise, we're going to have pollution. And the airport delegation answered all the questions they could. I'm sure they've done their best to answer all those questions, and Andy's he answered most of the questions as well. Over the, not just now, even yesterday, we've talked, had discussions before as well. So he's been doing a great job. My view on this is that the airport is asking for extension to the runway within its existing boundary. Some people seem to think that the airport's expanding, which makes it feel that it's from they're expanding outside. It's not expansion outside there, it's within their boundary. They just want to expand the runway by 164 meters. So the biggest question is, what do we do? Do we reject it because of climate change declarations and all that? Or do we approve it because we feel the economy will benefit from it and bring more employment to us, our area, with other benefits as well? On considering climate change, reject it and lose all the benefits it will bring to hundreds of families being able to earn money and help them prosper. Refuse it for better climate. Will it make any difference if Southampton Airport was to close? I don't believe it will. Because the climate change is a global problem. It's not a local problem. It's not just Eastleigh problem. If we could do that, I'd take my boiler off and throw it up in the bin today, if it would help, because it's not going to help. It needs a global solution to it. Every nation needs to get together and start doing things that will help the global problems. One little airport being closed is not going to help. As our officers, like Andy and everybody else, is confirmed, and the airport agrees with them, that going forward, EBC have some control over what happens at the airport with all the agreements. So we got some say in what they do and what they can do or what they can't do. And I'm sure they, with your help as well, when they can consult you that this is what we're likely to do, you might be able to get some more bits and pieces in that people would prefer. If larger aircraft are going to be used, so would that not reduce the number of flights? Because the smaller aircrafts, they're about 80 passengers or something. I've been on them a few times, going to Dublin, but I'm not sure. It's about 80 odd. And the aircrafts mentioned, they got about 180 odd, double the number. So the airlines would like to fill them before they fly them. So I'm sure the flights would reduce rather than increase. Although if we get so many passengers that we get up to 3 million, yes, then they will, and that's going to take time. So that I'm sure that would reduce the impact it has on everything, noise, pollution, and hopefully in the near future, we will get planes that are more efficient, less noisier, and less pollutant. So I'm not going to say too much more, but all I would say is that my own family lives very close to the airport in Southampton Road. We've always had traffic on Southampton Road. That's why we want the Chicken Hall lane link. We've always got traffic in Lee Road. It's not just Southampton Road. Sometimes, although I live in top end of Lee Road, sometimes it takes me 10 in the evenings at a busy time. It takes me 10 minutes to get out of my drive in my car. So you just can't say that, you know, Southampton roads, this, that, and the other. I don't want to, you know, have a go at anybody, but we know where the traffic problems are. You go down to Northern Road in Southampton. You see, that's 10 times worse than Southampton Road. You know, what can we do? Because if we are so concerned, then we should stop driving cars. You know, I'm not having a go at anybody, but I think we should think of these things carefully and consider these, what the economic benefit is. Is it going to bring jobs? Is it going to give income to families? Is that going to make their lives better? And on the other side, we've got the pollution and the noise that's going to affect people's lives as well. So that's what we got to consider, which one we go for. So as I've said, my own family lives right next to the airport, and I'm still feeling that I should support this application because that's the way ahead. Hopefully in the next few years, all the noise and pollution would be reduced with the new technology and everything. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Councillor Mann. We're now going to go to Councillor Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, firstly, before I come on to the main things I wanted to talk about, just pick up on a couple of things that have already been mentioned. And that's again with reference to the traffic. I mean, obviously Highways England and Hampshire County Council, they've done their modelling. They are the experts at the end of the day. They know far more about traffic and traffic modelling and where it's coming from than we do. And I think it's a little bit disingenuous to be using Southampton Road as an example, because Southampton Road is not going to be the main gateway into the actual airport. The main gateway is going to be Junction 5, Wide Lane and Spitfire Roundabout. So I think that the reports and the comments from Highways England and Hampshire County Council as the highway authority, that is evidenced in the document that we were given, and that is are the people that we ought to be listening to. We can't pick and choose which experts we listen to. At the end of the day, we have to be guided by people that do this for a living and are professionals in what they do. And as again, like the air quality, and that air quality is an issue. And at the end of the day, we all drive cars. And we're quite happy to still drive cars. We drive them less, obviously. But again, the reports from our own people and what have you is that the actual air quality on this application is not going to be significant and severe, because again, a lot of the traffic is not going to be coming through the air quality management areas of Southampton Road and Lee Road. It's going to be coming off Junction 5 and Wide Lane. So I just wanted to pick up those points. There's some other points I might pick up as I actually go. But the main reason I actually wanted to speak at this particular moment in time is because I actually wanted to pick up on climate change. And Councillor Mann has actually touched on some of the points that I might also pick up on. At the end of the day, let's not beat about the bush. Climate change is vitally important. At the end of the day, it's important to all of us because it is quite correct. It will affect all of us. And that's not just us in Eastleigh or UK, but actually globally. Okay, but it does need to be realistic and it does need to be taken in context. And with this application, currently Southampton International Airport actually accounts for 1% of UK aviation carbon emissions. This rises to 1.01% in 2030. 1.15% in 2040, and in 2050 it actually reduces to 0.93%. And this obviously, for the information that we've had in the report and what have you, is because we're actually looking at 3 million passengers per annum, and because of the fleet mix, that means that you have I was going to say larger planes. They are larger, but they're already using the airport at the moment. The airport, this whole thing with the extension is not to bring in larger planes. We need to be very clear that the current larger planes that we're talking about already use the airport. We already have an EasyJet A320 that's used the airport. We've already had an A320 from KLM that uses the airport. So we're actually not bringing in larger planes. It's utilising existing planes. So in 2050, the percentage of carbon that Southampton International Airport is producing as a percentage of UK aviation is 0.93. And that is due to the larger planes being more efficient. So what actually needs to be explored is if this carbon figure will actually be saved if this extension is refused, as will these flights just not take place? The answer to that is no. The flights will still take place, but they'd be from somewhere else. They'd be from another airport. And then, of course, what you do have is the people that are still going to fly, the people that aren't not going to fly, will then travel to these other places. And then there is the debate about what the carbon emissions may be from people travelling to that new place. So will the figure actually be saved? Well, the answer is no. This then has the consequence of making the alleged saving actually questionable if this application is refused. Something that Councillor Mann has already indicated and commented on. It is, as I've said quite rightly, that carbon emissions should be taken seriously, and EBC has declared a climate emergency. Quite correct. As I stated last night, most of the carbon emitted won't actually fall in Eastleigh Borough Council, because most of the carbon from an aircraft is produced on landing and takeoff and cruise, climb and descent. So we don't have an issue with EBC's climate emergency. But that doesn't mean to say that we ignore carbon, because as Councillor Mann has already said, greenhouse gases and emissions of carbon is a global issue. So just because it's outside of Eastleigh doesn't mean to say we can go, oh, yippee, we're okay because Eastleigh's going to meet its targets on its climate emergency. It means that we do have to take it into account, because with this application, we're not just thinking Eastleigh centric, we're not just thinking Southampton centric, we are thinking Solent region centric. And obviously, because we're talking about climate emissions, carbon emissions, we're talking globally. And that is right. So it's been stated that it's an emergency, this is a climate emergency, and therefore something should be done immediately, i.e. reject this application. So we do this, and we do this on the back of Heathrow Runway 3, that is airport, and other airport expansion. As we've already heard, London City Airport is looking to expand from 5 million to 10 million. We have already heard that work, I stand to be corrected, but Bradford and Leeds Airport. But there are other airport expansions around the country. Southampton International Airport isn't expanding. It's extending its runway. And it's extending its runway so the planes that already use the airport can do so efficiently, thus reducing the carbon emissions per passenger. And whilst we just talked briefly about airport expansion, we found out last night that the airport can't actually accommodate more than 3 million passengers per annum, even if it wanted to, because the infrastructure won't accommodate more than 3 million passengers per annum. There aren't sufficient stands for more aircraft. But certainly there is only 4 stands for the A320s and the Boeing 737s that actually form the forecast and the business or the forecast that the airport put to us. Equally, the actual terminal itself can't deal with more than 3 million passengers per annum. As Councillor Mann has already said, EBC has a lot of control over the airport. We are the planning authority. So if the airport wanted to go above 3 million passengers per annum, they'd have to come back for a planning application. We would then be talking about expansion of the airport rather than extending the runway and making best use of the existing infrastructure and best use of the runway. So as it's an emergency, do we stop using the internet? Because the IT industry actually generates more carbon globally than the aviation industry. Do we stop shipping? Generates around about 1.7% of global emissions versus 1.9% of global aviation global emissions. We're going to find out possibly what a reduction in shipping will do, courtesy of the Suez Canal. 150 cruise ships and 150 container ships stacked up, waiting to try and get through, turning around and going around Africa into the Mediterranean. And it's already been reported that there will be delays and therefore there could be shortages. Whilst we're talking about shipping and carbon, do we close the port of Southampton? And obviously the cruise port as well. Are we going to buy our electric hybrid cars tomorrow? As globally, road transport is around about 11.9% of global emissions. Are we going to stop building everything? Because globally, cement production is 3% of global emissions. And are we going to stop flying to visit family, or not take a holiday, or not visit a far-flung place to experience that country's culture? That's already been answered, because the answer to that is no, we're not. I actually very much doubt it, because we will be realistic and we will do what we can afford. It is my belief, my strong belief, that greenhouse gases and climate change is a global issue, and it needs global solutions. And this will be driven by economically strong countries. And it'll be driven by economically strong countries because they are the countries that can afford to do the technological research and development of the technologies that we are hearing about and that I briefly mentioned last night, with hydrogen power, hydrogen gloop, biofuels and direct carbon capture. These technological advancements will in turn help and benefit those countries that don't have sound or strong economies, and in some cases are countries that are most affected by climate change. Last night I briefly mentioned about countries and island nations that rely solely on tourism, and they actually rely on tourism to actually just eat, because they don't have the safeguards that we have in this country. I have been to a few, and that. So in the case for this application and UK aviation, the solution has to be the national policies of the aviation policy framework. The airport's national policy statement, making best use of the runways, Aviation 2050, and the recommendations of the Council on Climate Change and the 6th Carbon Budget, as Andy Granfield stated in his very first slide to us this evening. The problem needs solving as a whole coherent solution rather than piecemeal, which is what will be the case with this application, because piecemeal and looking at the much larger picture, Southampton International Airport, whilst in the greater scheme of things, is insignificant versus the downsides and the very real threat that Southampton International Airport will close, which I will now talk about. I want to pick up on comments that have been made about the airport viability, as it has been mentioned a number of times and it has been mentioned in debate. It is also worth talking about it and justified and relevant due to this slide that Andy put up at the start, due to its impact on the local and regional economy. It is clearly stated in the planning document in paragraphs 485 and 486 that without the extension, the forecast passenger numbers are forecast to be 0.9 million in 2020, 1.01 million by 2027 and 1.02 million by 2037 without the extension. It clearly states that to break even, the airport needs between 1.1 and 1.2 million passengers per annum. And this is actually supported by the Council's Head of Economy and Business. These forecasts, which are in the report and in the environmental statement addendum 2 on page 12, are below the break-even point on viability. And as stated in paragraph 486, the airport would need to consider alternative funding to be viable. Paragraph 486 states that in 2019 the airport losses was 20%. We heard last night from Steve Salai, the operational director at Southampton International Airport, that the 2020 losses for the airport were a further 6 to 7 million, and 2021 being a similar 7 to 8 million. With the prospects of 1 million passengers per annum not being reached until 2024 due to COVID, there will be similar losses and further losses in 22 and 23, on top of the already 13 to 15 million pounds losses of 19 and 20. The cumulative losses are just increasing, so far to the tune of about 24.5 million. This brings us back to the breakdown point and the consideration of alternative funding to be able to operate viably. Simply, alternative funding equals subsidy. Operating a business with a subsidy means it is not viable, and anybody can see that that is the case. This is further backed up by the CapEx and OpEx projections against passenger numbers January 2021 that is submitted and on the planning portal as a public document for everybody to see, dated the 1st of February 2021. The figures clearly show an operating loss at 1 million passengers per annum of 1.5 million per year, and a cumulative loss of 30 million plus due to the figures I've previously stated, and an ongoing revenue loss on a yearly basis of in excess of 30 million by 2030, and that's just doing the simple maths. Who is going to subsidise the revenue cost of a business to the tune of 1.5 million a year every year? And of course, this doesn't take into account any capital expenditure for any investment in new facilities, new technology, tarmac, resurfacing, or investments for the airport to come up to the green credentials that were actually mentioned last night. I can't remember the technical names for them, but obviously one of the things were further investments on the stands so that aircraft didn't have to stand there with their engines running to generate the power they need. That won't happen. Quite simply, no business can survive like that. In summary, the airport without the extension is not a viable business, and it clearly brings its existence into account. So we need to consider and take into account, what does Eastleigh look like without an airport? How many direct and indirect jobs connected with the aviation industry will that affect? As Councillor Mann has said, how many families will be affected by job losses? How will the Channel Islands be affected by its severed link and easy access to Southampton General Hospital? How will the businesses that have chosen to come and move into this region, of which we've had numerous emails from and representation yesterday from Chambers of Commerce, Solent Business, the chairman of the Aegeus Bowl, leader of Hampshire County Council, and they've set up in this area because of the proximity of the airport and the connectivity it gives. All those jobs and businesses are in jeopardy. Freeport. Basis of the Freeport application was put together with the airport. It is clear to see that the airport is not viable. That is not longer the case. And then, of course, there's a Chickenham Lane Link Road. What would be the site be? What would the site be if, and it's a very real possibility, because just think about it yourself, if you were an investor in a business that has accumulated 30 million pounds losses and accumulating 1.5 million losses a day, are you still going to back it? Or are you going to try and basically retrieve your losses? What will that site be? What will it look like? And of course, we then won't have Southampton International Airport being present, because once it's gone, to to be at the forefront of new aviation technology in the future, because we're ideally placed in Southampton, close to the Solent, for this new technology. Again, something that Councillor Mann brought up. So in summary, as Councillor Mann has said, it's a balancing act. Climate, jobs, economy. So in summary, if we refuse this application to reduce carbon, which will actually just be taken up somewhere else anyway and won't make a difference because we're doing it piecemeal rather than a whole coherent approach, we don't actually get a reduction in carbon overall. But at the same time, we put the airport in very real jeopardy, as I've just demonstrated, and all the consequences that go with that. So that is further reason why I will support this application and strongly support this application. And with this council, work closely with the airport, one of the most tightest controlled airports in the country by a local authority. We actually have the ability to actually cap the number of air traffic movements between 6 and 7. Currently, it is not capped. The airport could have 30 or 40 air traffic movements between 6 and 7 at the moment if they wanted to, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. But we can actually have that additional constraint on the airport. We control whether the airport will grow above 3 million passengers per annum because we're the planning authority and everything else. So I strongly support this application for the reasons I've laid out and others, and look forward to working with the airport to make things better, and also to work with the airport on a coherent and complete picture on reducing carbon, rather than a piecemeal one, which, as I say, will just be taken up somewhere else. So I would urge all councillors to think very carefully on the ramifications of this decision. I understand that climate change is important, but so is the very existence of the airport. And climate change can still be tackled with the airport, but in the correct and the proper way and at the right level. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bicknell. So we're now going to go to Councillor Irish, please.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, I would like to endorse your comments made earlier about thanking all these people that have put an awful lot of time and effort into this planning application. Our planning officers, our IT people, our wonderful admin staff. They've done a wonderful job, and I can't thank them enough for what they've done, and I really feel sorry for them. I hope they're going to have a nice break after this particular application. And also for me, I mean, I've been on this council now for 39 years, and in all those 39 years, I've been on planning, and I can't remember having to deal with a planning application as complicated and as important as this one. Maybe the Aegis Bowl, I'm not quite sure, but I was trying to think today where we've had applications, but this is certainly a very, very difficult application to deal with. And for me, it is definitely a matter of planning balance. And I think to myself, well, you know, that it's good to have an airport in Eastleigh. It's very nice to have it. We've got to think about the economy, we've got to think about the jobs, we've got to think about people's livelihoods, and that's important. But equally, we've got to think about climate change. I mean, Eastleigh has declared its position on climate change, which I'm pleased to support. What was that? Oh, can't see. Oh, so yeah, Eastleigh has declared its position on climate change, which I'm very pleased to support. So sorry, Chair, I'm being distracted by the.
Yeah, I think if people can stop putting things in chat.
So, sorry, can I just ask that any conversation should go through the chair? So for members of the public who may be wondering what's going on, one of the councillors, Councillor Bourne, has indicated that although he can hear Councillor Irish, he can't actually see him. I can see Councillor Irish on my screen. Yep, I'm getting the thumbs up from everybody else. Councillor Bourne, are you able to see Councillor Irish? No, Councillor Bicknell's not either.
No, I can't. Sorry. I can hear his words, so it's fine. I just wanted to indicate, just in case anyone else had a problem.
Okay, if you can just bear with me 1 second, please. Okay, so he is actually visible on the live link, so and all councillors can hear Councillor Irish, which is the essential thing, so we can continue. Sorry for the distraction there, Councillor Irish, but I'm sure you appreciate how important it is.
Absolutely, quite right. Yeah, I've lost my thread now actually, but yeah, I was talking about that. You know, Eastleigh's declared its position on climate change, and I'm very pleased to support that. And I think that every area that declares its position on climate change and tries to tackle it will actually contribute to the global problem. And it's not just here in Eastleigh, as has been said, it's all over the country, it's all over the world. And I think in our own small way, if we can do something to control climate change, which I'm extremely worried about, then we're doing the right thing. So, as I say, it's a matter of balance, isn't it? It's balancing the economy, it's balancing jobs, it's balancing livelihoods. It's also balancing the climate, the future of our planet, future of the children of this country, and it's looking after our residents. And you know, do we want our residents to have put up with more traffic in Southampton Road? Do we want our residents in Campbell Road to put up with a lot more noise? It's difficult. We've got to get this balance right. And as Sarah said earlier, or Councillor Tyson Payne said earlier, that the future of flying, and that's right. And I can quote an example of about 2 years ago when we had our friends here from Villeneuve St George for Remembrance. It didn't come last year, obviously, because of COVID, but they came 2 years ago. And I said to them, "Well, did you have a nice journey from Paris?" And they said, "Yeah, we came on the Eurostar, and then we had to get through London and then come down on the train from Waterloo." And I said, "Well, why didn't you fly then? From you're next door to the airport." Oh no, they said, "Our council's banned flying now," and that's 2 years ago. A council in France that has banned people from flying, well, members of the council from flying, and then I think that's a pretty general situation. So people are very, very concerned about flying. I mean, I like to fly, and I haven't flown for a while, but I look forward to going to fly again somewhere. But I do think we've really got to consider how many flights we make. I think that's important. So yeah, balance is important. We've got to think about our residents. We've got to think about the people that have to live here in Eastleigh, that have to put up with everything day by day. And we also have to think about our airport and the benefits that it brings. But I don't think that refusing the runway extension will close the airport. I think the airport will still be here, hopefully. But as I say, it's a fine balance. I really can't decide at the moment which way, but I hope someone can persuade me during the rest of the evening how to go. But that's my view, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Irish. It's always very valuable to have the benefit of your extensive experience of being a councillor. So we're now going to move across to Councillor Doogie, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you see me? Can you all hear me?
Yes, I can see and hear you.
Okay, brilliant. All right, thank you very much for that. I just want to echo some of your words you said earlier regarding the officers and the amount of work they've put in. I think it is important to notify that, given that they've spent a lot of time, both personal and professional time on this, and I think it's important to acknowledge that they are appreciated, especially when the work is so heavy and so specific and also so significant. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. So I want to echo your words on that as well. But I also think as well we need to also thank the airport for being such a model example of how to be a good citizen as a business in terms of the way they've engaged with local communities and also with officers and ourselves. So I think that's another thing we need to do as well. And I want to thank them for the work they did. Before I go into my argument, I think one thing I want to do first is to perhaps challenge the thinking of Councillor Bicknell and Councillor Mann on climate change. I think their views on this is very short-sighted, given the fact that by the time repercussion comes, by the time we feel the full effect of climate change, at that the vast majority of this committee will be alive, and that's probably a fact. We are making decisions for the future without taking consideration that we're not going to be around to be able to answer for our decisions, but also for people to challenge us on our decisions, and the fact that we're being told to not give significant weight to climate change and air quality, and the fact that we're dismissing the fact that the airport is contributing 1% of emission to the UK. Well, its contribution to air quality and to carbon emission is 1% of the UK. I think that's dangerous. It's dangerous because 1% has a massive effect in the future. It may not have the effect now. It will have an effect in the future, and I think it's very short-sighted to sort of dismiss that. You may be shaking your head, but at the end of the day, the likelihood of you being here and live to answer for your questions is very low, because my generation and my kids are the ones who will have to pick that up. And I think it's important to realize that although we're making a decision on something that's so significant, there's a very big, the vast majority of us on this committee are over 50, and I'm the only one who's below 30, I think. So we need to take that in consideration, that this will affect my generation, my kids, my great-grandkids, and the vast majority of us on this committee are not going to feel the full effect of that. So I think it's important to note that. But overall, on the application, I personally think that, especially on the social aspect of things, I think when it comes to health, we all know that the airport expansion is going to be bad for our residents, and I don't think the evidence put forward by the airport is enough to mitigate the health impact it will have on our residents, and that's mainly due to the fact that the flight path and the areas affected by noise and air quality are areas where there's high deprivation, and these communities need to be looked after, and I don't think the evidence put forward by the airport has enough in it to be able to mitigate that long-term impact, also short-term impact that will have on our communities and also the communities on our flight path. And the mitigation, of course, they put in place in terms of the community fund. I think someone alluded to that, and the housing strategy. Again, I don't think it will go far enough to be able to give people the satisfaction to living a healthy lifestyle surrounded by the airport. But of course, I'm happy to be convinced, and I'm sure that councillors on this panel will give good arguments. But so far, from what I heard from the airport application and from officers' recommendation, I don't think the evidence is there for us to allow for this to happen. And also one thing I want to touch on as well. There's been a few mentions about the Soul and Freeport area. For those who don't know, Southampton was a Freeport area from 1984 to 2012. So if this application was to be rejected, it's not going to have a detrimental impact on the fact that the Solent area will not be able to attract business, because it already does. I work for a global business, and they're based in the Solent area. So it's not the case that the Solent area will not be able to survive without the airport. It will be able to survive without the airport. But Chair, I'll stop here for now and hear what other councillors have to say.
Okay, thank you very much for your intervention, Councillor Doogie. And I certainly agree that it's really important to hear of diversity of opinion on this matter, because it does have such important consequences for us all. So we're now going to go across to Councillor Bourne, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to also put on record my sincere thanks to all contributors yesterday and the council officers who supported us from 9 AM until way past midnight in the council offices yesterday, going above and beyond, and it's really helped facilitate what we've tried to do here. There were many powerful and passionate speeches and statements yesterday, email correspondence over the previous months, including more today. It just doesn't stop. It's great to see so many people having engaged in the process, and I hope those watching yesterday will have heard councillors' questions and know that this is an open and transparent process. I've taken offence at some accusations from certain people saying that we're following party orders and that's a stitch up. It is absolutely not, and this debate is showing that we've got a diverse opinions, and we're reading the reports in different ways. This is a decision that I believe now hangs in the balance. We've heard compelling and reasoned arguments from both supporters and opposition. It's clear that despite what emailers and social messaging directed at me have said, that there's only one thing you can say, one decision you can get to. There are polar views and very little common ground. So whichever way this decision goes, it will upset a lot of people, and it's clear that the differences within this committee also emphasise the point about what a difficult decision this is for us. This has led to sleepless nights. I get quite emotional because it's such a huge decision on our shoulders. The question that I have to ask myself is, do I agree with the officer's recommendations? Do I accept the areas of the report? Do I disagree strongly enough to go against officer's recommendation? It's a decision that needs to be made on balance. That's quite clear, and everyone's stated that, because there are both benefits and disadvantages to this decision, and there's no clear-cut argument either way, despite what people keep telling me how I should think. We have in front of us a comprehensive and very technical report. Hours and hours and hours went into this report, and associated documents. It's taken some reading and taken some toll on all of us having to go through this information, and I don't think that's always going to be appreciated. One of the areas of greatest concern to me was the noise section, and I hadn't quite appreciated the scale of the issue from reading the report until we heard the objectors speak about it, and that really did affect me, the way that the passion was coming out and the examples coming out. But I was pleased that the airport have acknowledged this is a big issue, and they've reduced the 62 to 60. They've not capped the mitigation works, which I think was going to be a huge problem if we'd have left it at a set figure, because lots of people would have missed out on if they had a bigger house, etc. So this only helps the very most affected, though. And we do have to acknowledge that. The airport have gone above and beyond in respect of the 60. They've also acknowledged the schools. We've heard a lot about Bitton Park School. And it's not just about putting double glazing into a school. They've also talked about ventilation, etc. So whether that means aircon or something like that, I don't know. But there was an acknowledgement yesterday from the airport that it's not just about double glazing people in. But for people below the 60 mark, there is very little mitigation, and this has to be acknowledged, and that there will be adverse effects on a great many households. There will be the community fund, etc., but that's going to benefit certain people and in certain ways, but it's not going to help everyone. So there's an acknowledgement there that a lot of households are going to be pulled in to detriment. Whilst the report doesn't say that a refusal will mean the airport will close, I think it's very easy to read between the lines. A business that lost 7 million last year, 7 million this year, and until they reach 1.2 million passengers, they will continue to lose money. Businesses do not continue when they are losing so much money. Shareholders will will sell a business or close a business down because they will not fund it for years and years and years when there's little chance then of making back the profits, because the without the extension, you know, it will take them ages to get to 1.2, and it's unlikely they'll get to a higher number of passengers, because, you know, the Flybe, when Flybe was operating, we got up to nearly 2 million passengers. They were making profits. Those routes have been replaced by less frequent and half capacity planes. So the threat of losing our airport, whilst it's not in this report, in my opinion, is a real one, and one that you know, we have to take seriously. I don't think they're empty threats when you can see that, you know, the airport lost 7 million this year, 7 million last year, and will continue to lose money year after year. We've heard from many businesses, including Chamber of Commerce's, business groups, trade unions, all strongly in favour of the application, and expressing how much businesses and therefore jobs are reliant on the airport. Direct jobs at the airport and indirect jobs are so important, especially as we're recovering from a COVID pandemic. And COVID has made thousands of people redundant. Businesses have closed down because the government schemes just haven't, you know, whilst they've had furlough and there's business grants, not everyone's managed to survive. You know, it's not just a decision between health and wealth, because actually having a job, being employed, has so many health and mental health benefits that I don't think we can ignore. We have the opportunity here to secure local jobs and create new ones. I also can't ignore correspondence I've had from constituents who elected me to represent them, who live close to the airport, who've said they support this application. They knew they were living next to an airport. They accept, you know, that times change and, you know, the runway needs to be expanded, etc. But we still come back to this climate change emergency, and there's health issues, and there's no denying this, you know, at all. The evidence is clear. So it is a massive conflict between, you know, the health of many, and also the wealth of many by having a job. If we accept the recommendation, the airport owners have committed to invest £15 million. You know, that's a huge sum of money that they're willing to commit to Eastleigh and Southampton Airport, and we know a lot of that will end up in the local area because of their commitment to employ local people. We'll also see other investments with the setting up of the Freeport area, so the airport and the business park being a key part of this. You know, this investment is badly needed by the area, and you know, these reasons are pushing me to support the officer's recommendation. It's a hard one though, and yeah, it's really sorry, it's really affected me, and it's very emotional, so I better stop now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bourne, and I think you're obviously reflecting how seriously you're taking your duties tonight, and I'm sure that's what all our residents in the borough would want you to do. So we are now going to go to Councillor Bicknell again, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bourne, with your comments, with the effect that it's had on all of us as members, living, breathing and being totally consumed by this airport for quite a considerable amount of time. And I perfectly understand the emotional side of it as well. As I've said a number of times, and last night, is not a decision that any of us take lightly. I just wanted to come back actually just to a couple of corrections actually from Councillor Doogie. I wanted to correct him that actually I said it's not 1%. Southampton International Airport is not 1% of United Kingdom carbon emissions. It's 1% of aviation, UK aviation emissions. And as detailed in the report, UK aviation actually is 6% of the UK emissions. And actually, I am taking climate change seriously. My view is that actually it should be done as a whole coherent plan with all of aviation rather than piecemeal. I am fully aware of environmental impacts. I'm not going to go into my green credentials publicly, but I do have green credentials and I do have green beliefs, and that's so. Please, nobody underestimate my thoughts and passions for the environment and conservation, not just in this country but also globally. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bicknell. We're now going to go to Councillor Mann again, please.
Thank you, Chair. All I want to come back on is what Councillor Dougie said. I don't think I'm apologize before I say anything. I don't think he knows what he's talking about. I've explained that I care about climate change. I care about local people. I care about elderly. I care about the children. I've spent most of my life working with people in need, and he should apologize the way he spoke to me by mentioning my name, because nobody does that to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Clearly tensions are running high. This is obviously something that people are feeling very, very strongly about. And so I would like to take this opportunity to just remind all councillors to just remain focused on the issues, and we need to be very clear that we make no comments that could be interpreted as a personal attack, or any of our comments should become personal about another member of the committee. I'm sure that nobody has the intention of doing that, but sometimes our passions and our emotions can get the better of us. So can I just remind councillors, please, to conduct themselves in an appropriate manner. Thank you. We're going to go back to Councillor Clark now, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I suppose to settle things down a bit, I'm going to talk about someone that I think everyone likes. So someone nice, David Attenborough. I think everyone, whatever side they're on in this, likes listening to David Attenborough, I'm sure. And I did thank everyone yesterday, so I know everyone started off by thanking all the officers and everyone that's been involved. You know, I do feel that gratitude too, but I said that yesterday. But for me, I've listened to what everyone said. I think everyone is being sincere, but the climate emergency does still, for me, weigh very heavily on one side. And I know councillors, could I just suggest, Chair, I was going to suggest this at the beginning, that when we're not speaking, that we just switch our cameras off, because one thing I noticed when I was watching people's contributions is that I was partly watching people's contributions and I was partly watching other people's reactions to them, which I think is a bit off-putting and might have contributed to the atmosphere just now. So for me, the climate emergency is still on that side of the scales and still too heavy to be outweighed by what I believe are benefits, but they're short term in the grand scheme of things. And really, you know, some words that have inspired me are words that David Attenborough said, which I think are really relevant here. And it's in a book I read of his recently, and he says, many have called Chernobyl the most costly environmental catastrophe in history. Sadly, this isn't true. Something else has been unfolding everywhere across the globe, barely noticeable from day to day for much of the last century. This too is happening as the result of bad planning and human error. Not one helpless accident, but a damaging lack of care and understanding that affects everything we do. It didn't begin with a single explosion. It started silently before anyone realised it, as a result of causes that are multifarious, global and complex. Its fallout cannot be detected by a single instrument. It has taken hundreds of studies across the world to confirm it, that it is even happening. Its effects will be far more profound than the contamination of soils and waterways in a few unfortunate countries, it could ultimately lead to the destabilisation and collapse of everything we rely upon. So within that, we see that, the causes of this climate emergency aren't, down to one global phenomenon that is going to be solved by one global action. There are lots of contributory factors all around the world, and we talk about not being able to solve the climate emergency piecemeal, but we also need to make sure that we don't make it worse piecemeal. If I just go forward slightly, because I think this is also relevant. Pripyat, the town which was affected by the Chernobyl disaster, is discussed by David Attenborough, and he says every morning the first thing the people of Pripyat would have seen on drawing back the curtains in their apartment was the giant nuclear power station that would one day destroy their lives. Most of the inhabitants worked there. The remainder relied on those who did for their livelihoods. Many would have understood the dangers of living so close to it, yet I doubt whether any would have chosen to switch the reactors off. Chernobyl brought them that precious commodity, a comfortable life. He goes on to say we're all Pripyat now, and Pripyat is a ghost city now. And as David Attenborough said, he doubts anyone there 50 years ago would have switched the reactors off. It would have been unbelievably difficult to turn off the short-term comforts that it brought. But what we need to do here, whilst it is difficult, is not as difficult, because refusal of this application will not close the airport. As we have established yesterday, the airport will still be viable. I think that it's unfortunate that suddenly this has been reopened now, because I think if the debate was about the viability of the airport, we would need far more work beforehand to discuss the economic consequences of that. We would need expert input to look at what that would have meant, and we would have needed detailed analysis of what the consequences would have been. It was clear yesterday that the airport has a future without the extension. That was made clear, it was queried, and it was established. So we are not being, by refusing this application, we will not be closing the airport. Okay, there may be some difficulties for the management. The management may need to overcome some challenges to secure profitability, but we are not if we refuse this airport, if we refuse this application, we are not going to be closing the airport. By voting for refusal, we're simply stopping the dramatic impact in carbon emissions, the damage of which outweighs, in my opinion, the short-term socio-economic benefits. Now, yesterday, I made clear that I'm aware that that this only represents at the moment 1% of UK aviation emissions. I'm also aware that the aviation emissions at the moment represent a small percentage of UK overall emissions. But as I pointed out yesterday, that share that aviation holds is likely to increase as other sectors dramatically improve and clean up, because it is recognised that aviation is the most difficult one to deal with. So firstly, we shouldn't underplay the contribution that these 370,000 extra tonnes of carbon are going to, underplay the impact that these are going to have. But secondly, we should also be very mindful that we're privileged to be in a position where we can intervene and prevent additional emissions of that magnitude, because most people can only impact on a much smaller scale. And really, if we don't act, what sort of example are we setting to everybody else? And yes, this is a global problem, but we're all citizens of the globe, and we all need to do what we can to solve it for future generations. Yes, it completely needs to be dealt with globally. I hope that the government steps up and does more in the future. But one other point I would make is that some of the councillors who in this meeting are arguing that we should not, as a council or as individuals, try to tackle the climate emergency, did actually vote for the climate change emergency declaration, and the government has done nothing to discourage councils declaring an emergency, a climate emergency. So following that logic, it's perfectly reasonable for us here as councillors to do what we can to limit the damage to our climate. And also, I would add that I hope that around the country we see others taking the same action, because future generations deserve it. I may speak again later, Chair, but between today and yesterday I've said quite a lot. So, you know, I'm quite happy to let other people take the floor.
Thank you for your generosity there, Councillor Clark. I think we are now going to go to Councillor Doogie, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to clarify that going back to Councillor Mann's points. I like to think we're all adults here, and we can all take criticism. I was not trying to be personal. I was aiming at any person, and I'm certainly not going to apologise for challenging anybody's thoughts on here. That's what we're elected for. We're elected to challenge each other's thoughts and challenge each other's behaviours, each other's ideas, and as adults, and I think as adults we should be able to take criticism. So I'm not going to apologise for that. But come back on Councillor Bignell's point in terms of current plan. In my whole argument there, what I was saying, or what I was trying to say, what I was trying to express, is that yes, there needs to be a plan on climate change that needs to be done, yes, by government, but that action starts with individuals like us, so local government officials, elected officials like us. That's where it starts. By simply leaving it to government to do something about it, we're potentially not going to get anywhere. So it's important that we as locally elected officials start that motion. And again, just go deeper in the point I was trying to make here is that we as locally elected officials and as the people of now need to be good citizens and be good in making sure that any decision we make now takes into consideration the impact we'll have on future generations. And we shouldn't be thinking about the decision we're making now and the effect we'll have now. We should be thinking about the generation of tomorrow, our kids, our grandkids. And that's the point I was trying to drive at, that yes, it's good to want everybody else to deal with the problem, but if we don't want to deal with the problem and passing it along to everybody else, everybody else is going to pass the problem along. So as one of the youngest of the committee, and I'm sure I've raised that quite often, I'm making sure I'm playing my part in the decision making, in making sure that my decision and my thought process not only has been challenged, but also my thought process encourage behaviours that will leave a good impact on the generations of tomorrow. And that's something, and unfortunately, that's something I noticed that in local government, especially, there's not enough voice for future generations, and we need more of that. And the point I was trying to make when I previously spoke is that essentially that we need to think about the next generation, not the now, not the tomorrow. But I'll stop there for the time being, and I hear all the arguments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for clarifying, Councillor Doogie. So we are just going to go to Councillor Bicknell, and after we've heard briefly from Councillor Bicknell, we will then be taking a short comfort break. So Councillor Bicknell, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to come back to this whole issue of the viability of the airport, and I'm either not being listened to or somebody hasn't actually read the documents and the report. It is very clear in this 300 and whatever page.
Sorry, Councillor Bicknell, can I just ask you to temper the way that you are making your points, please?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. At the end of the day, it is very clear in this document that the viability of the airport is questioned. It is in black and white and agreed with by the head of business and economy in the council that the airport is viable if it has alternative funding. That alternative funding is a subsidy. It is very clear on this document, which is a public document, on the website that actually shows a 1.5 million loss. I'm very sorry, but if anybody thinks that a business that is operating on an annual basis at a £1.5 million loss on top of accumulated losses is viable, then there can only be two explanations. One, they don't understand business, or two, they don't want to understand the facts and evidence that actually is available to us and has been presented. At the end of the day, the viability of the airport is fact. It's not open for debate. It is figures in black and white. There is a very real risk that the airport is not viable without support and continual investment, or sorry, subsidy from shareholders that, as Councillor Bourne has already explained, will not continue. So it's actually, whereas we can debate the ways that we want to tackle climate change, my view is to do it non-piecemeal. Other members is to do it piecemeal and use this as an example. That's fine, that's a debate. But where it comes to the actual viability of the airport and whether it will stay open or close, to actually say it will not close based on these black and white factual figures, it just doesn't stack up. It just does not hold water at the end of the day. I just wanted to make that very clear, because it almost is, it's being dismissed. And as I say, the figures are there in black and white at the end of the day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bicknell. As I said, we are now going for a short comfort break of 10 minutes. We're going to have a 10-minute break. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had the opportunity to grab a quick drink. To all the members of the community who are watching at home, I hope that you have been enjoying tonight's debate, and I'm sure that you will agree that it's very clear from the passion and commitment that councillors have been showing this evening just how seriously they are taking the issues involved here. So we will be resuming shortly and going to Councillor Clark. But before we do so, I would just like to remind councillors, please, to stay on the very positive side of being engaged in this debate. Please keep your comments very focused on the different arguments and the different things that we need to take into account, and please can we remain professional at all times. And can I remind you, of course, that if you wish to speak, please indicate in the chat that you wish to speak and I will bring you into the debate. So over to Councillor Clark, please.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say that when the experts were here yesterday, you know, we dealt with the issue of viability, and I think everyone who's watched this digested what was said yesterday and where it sits in this planning balance. And I just, you know, do hope, I think you're chairing this excellently, and I do hope that we continue to support you in making sure this meeting's successful. And I think that people need to just pause and reflect on each person's contributions rather than jumping in and getting angry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. We're now going to go to Councillor Tyson Payne, please.
I'm really sorry you caught me mid-mouthful. My apologies to everyone. So back to this whole perspective about the viability of the airport. For me, it's very clear that they have made a loss in the last couple of years, but there have been a number of years when they've made profit. And like all organisations, there are ups and downs. And when you're in profit, you are able to hold that finance going forward to support your business. I am absolutely certain if we don't permit this extension, they will have some tough times. But I'm also convinced that there are other revenue streams that they can be looking at that are not necessarily about subsidies. And I think we need to think of business as an ebb and flow, not a constant trajectory upwards. And from that perspective, I feel the airport will survive. We were clearly given that steer last night. They weren't saying they were going to close the airport. And I just want to think about that moving forward, rather than just focusing on it's this or that. It's a continuum. So that's that. Now, where's my other notes? So the climate emergency, it is an international thing, but it starts at home. It's a bit like charity. Charity starts at home. And every journey starts with the first step. And I think from a climate change perspective, we need to think about what we're doing here, not about what impact it has here, but what that impact could mean for the globe. And for me, us putting down a marker that we are not going to expand this airport just for profit. We are going to think about the bigger picture. So I think that's all I had to say. I'm sure I'll come back with something else later. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson Payne. Do we have any other councillors who wish to speak? Silence is golden, as they say. So I'm not seeing that anyone else wants to speak. So are councillors feeling that they're in a position that they're wanting to go to the vote? There's nothing else they want to say?
Yes. Well, we'd like to hear your comments, Chair.
Okay, we've got Councillor Bourne who'd like to speak.
I was just going to echo what Councillor Clark said, is that, yeah, we're waiting with bated breath to hear the chair. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, oh, no, Councillor Bicknell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to, camera wake up in a minute. I'm not going to add anything else on with reference to debate. I've made it very clear my position and my reasonings for it and what have you. But I did want to pick up on the comments you made when you actually we came back off the short break. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to apologise for well, for a better word, being very emotional and very passionate about this. You're absolutely right. Councillor Bourne picked up on it earlier, that at the end of the day, we have all taken this very seriously. We have spent a long period of time living with this, and obviously yesterday was not the shortest day that we've ever had, and was difficult for all of us. And obviously, we're tired, or we were tired. We've had a night's sleep since. But as I say, some people are more emotional and show it more than others, and that. I apologise. But we are all emotional about this. We are all passionate about this, and actually, in reality, we're all emotional and passionate about the same things, but we just have different thoughts on how we should be dealing with it. At the end of the day, nobody is dismissing anything with reference to climate change, which is obviously the big thing. It's just that we have different views on how we believe would be the best way to tackle it with reference to this application and overall, and that. So yeah, so that's just all I wanted to add. Thank you, Chair, and looking forward with along with everybody else to hear your deliberations.
Thank you very much. Well, you've all set me up. I hope I'm not going to disappoint after such a build-up. So obviously I've been chairing up to now, and that's a very specific and important role where I have been doing my very best to make sure that we have a very engaging debate and that everyone's had the opportunity to express themselves and fully engage. So I guess what I'm going to do now is to take off my chair's hat, so to speak, and I'm going to now speak from my position as a member of ELAC, as a representative of the community. And when I've finished, I will put back on my chair's hat and we will either go to the vote if everyone is happy at that stage to do that, or if things that I say spark off further debate, then obviously we will go down that path. I haven't prepared a written speech or anything like that, so all I have in front of me is, I don't think anyone would be able to see that, but I have a sort of mind map of all the different sort of areas that I sort of thought I've been thinking about. Obviously overnight we had a huge amount of we took in a huge amount of information yesterday, and it was a very, very long session, and overnight that's all sort of been filtering through. So this is kind of how I'm approaching it. I'm gonna have to put my glasses on so I can see all the different bits that I've sort of been thinking about and bringing in the things that you've been saying tonight, and how that's sort of leading me. So if I start with the airport, the airport is itself, I think it's an absolutely cracking airport. As a local regional airport, it's fantastic. It is convenient. It has great rail and road links. It is a gateway to the south. We've got a great history behind the airport. That's all really fantastic. But also I think there's a point around the airport evolved from a sort of, I don't know, sort of a military airfield to what it is today. And I think, yeah, I think we all have to acknowledge if we were starting afresh, we probably wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't put an airport where it is. But I think if we didn't have to consider climate change at all, I think, you know, we are incredibly lucky to have a regional airport as we do. As many of my colleagues have spoken about, there are, you know, this is really, really difficult stuff. This is politics where it really matters. And, you know, sometimes you read the comments that people make on social media, and yeah, it's really tough being in this situation, because whatever we do tonight, you know, depending on which way things go, somebody's going to love us and somebody's going to hate us. So for my part, you know, the economic situation is really important. I think Councillor Bicknell made a good point last night when he said about jobs, that obviously there's the income and you know, that there's the importance of that to families and livelihoods, but also he referenced the fact that, you know, those jobs are really important as well from well-being point of view. And as somebody, you know, that's the area that I train in, so I really recognise the value of jobs to people's well-being and being able to contribute. That's incredibly important. The fact that the airport potentially supports so many local jobs, you know, that is incredibly important. The you know, 265 jobs for the construction of the project, that's really important. A £15 million investment in the community, you know, that's really really important. At the same time, I do have some sort of concerns around the economic arguments. I think we seem to have been very focused on the economic benefits, but I haven't really heard anybody talk about the economic disbenefits, if there is such a thing, but I'm sure you get what I mean. Because actually, you know, several of my colleagues have talked about the health issues. And those health issues, you know, they cost money. That will cost our NHS to help people with their who are experiencing mental illnesses, or who are having cardiovascular problems or having respiratory problems. So there's a cost to our NHS from having an airport. There is a cost in terms of pollution. There's a cost in terms of enforcement. There's a cost in terms of congestion, all of those sorts of things. And I don't know that really got picked up in our report. It is quite clear to me from yesterday's session that there is an enormous amount of support in the business community for the airport, and that is really really heartening to hear. I guess also I'm sort of thinking about, in terms of the economic case, and it sort of made it very plain in the report that, you know, we recognise that there are these harms, if I use that word, that there are some harms that come from the airport, be that in terms of health, or be that in terms of the impact on the environment. And so, as everyone said, we're trying to weigh in the balance of the economic benefit, and is that sufficient enough to you know, to warrant or to justify, I guess, those sorts of harms. And that's one I'm really sort of struggling with, because to what extent do I have confidence that those jobs and that added value, the growth, the economic growth, is actually going to materialise? And I guess, you know, we need to think about which several of my colleagues have sort of talked about, you know, the future of flying, and actually has that changed, and has the pandemic changed things to such an extent that we are not going to go back to where we were before in terms of, you know, how IT has changed, so that, you know, we are doing the largest planning application that we have ever done, and we are doing it virtually. And I don't know, but from the positive feedback that I've had from members of the community last night and today, you know, you seem to think that we're doing quite a good job of it. So has that sort of changed things? The fact that the carbon, you know, those businesses that we were hearing from yesterday, they are going to have to change the way that they operate to move towards an ever increasing sort of low carbon approach to businesses, to business. So what will that mean? Yeah, so there's lots of things there that I'm sort of thinking about. I think it's unfortunate, this whole question around the airport survival and viability. I think Andy was very clear yesterday. I can understand why Councillor Bicknell is saying the things that he's saying, and I can understand equally what Councillor Clark has said in response. But we did revisit the topic several times yesterday, and Andy, it seemed to me, was sort of being quite clear that whatever the airport may have said in their marketing and in their communications, you know, to the community, actually in terms of the planning application that we are deciding tonight, the airport weren't saying that they wouldn't be, this wasn't a question of survival, and that, you know, we had this talk about break even, and so things would be difficult, but I think the report refers to the fact that the shareholders were sort of committed. So yeah, economy is really, really important, absolutely. And then we come to noise. And noise is the thing that I must admit I am really, really struggling with. I'm struggling with everything from the very basic, the construction programme. You know, obviously, if you want to extend the runway, if that's what's going to happen, it needs to be built, and it will be built at night. 8.5 months of nighttime working from 11 o'clock till 6 o'clock in the morning. And one of the most affected areas will be Campbell Road. And the people in Campbell Road have a lot of experience of nighttime noise and of noise generally because of the fact of where they live. And I know how challenging they find that noise, and the thought of having 8.5 months of that is yeah. So I was very reassured by Sue's comments yesterday about the steps that would be taken to sort of deliver, I don't know, to sort of manage how that would be happen, and the enforcement, and very much of making sure that absolutely everything that needed to be done would be done. But that's a challenge, let's be honest. How do you build a runway without making a lot of noise, and at night it's quiet and that noise, you know, seems a lot louder. In terms of the mitigation, I was really pleased that the installation scheme has been increased. So it's not at 63, it's been increased to 60. I'm really pleased that it's not limited to 5,000, and that actually, you know, it will provide what the different householder needs. That's all sort of good. But it is really difficult for me to get away from the scale of the number of people that will be affected. You know, 46,000 people. is what we're talking about. And I've had lots of people, and some people have made comments about it tonight, to sort of say, well, you know, you go and buy a house under the flight path, well, what do you expect? But we've got 34,000 people who weren't previously affected by noise and who now are going to be. 34,000, that's a hell of a lot of people. So the area is being increased by I think it's 9.4 kilometres squared. That's a lot of people. The number of people affected by those incidences of noise where it's over sort of 65 decibels plus, those experiencing 50 episodes of that a day is sort of, you know, going up from sort of 1,300 people at the baseline to 26,000 in 2033 potentially. That is a hell of a lot of people affected by sort of noise, and that really concerns me. I recognise that we've got the contour cap, and that's positive. But to me, what that seems to be doing is very much sort of making sure it isn't any worse than what's in the report. That's what it's effectively doing. And I'm sort of concerned about those levels. So I'm grateful that it's not going to be even worse, but actually those levels in the report itself, those are a concern for me. And they're a concern for me because of the health impacts of noise. I felt some of the contributions yesterday were really powerful. When they talked about the impact on children and education, when they talked about how one contributor, I think it might have been one of the councillors from Southampton, he just talked about, you know, how people in the community, they stop having sort of conversations, they sort of, you know, they're rushing to get indoors, you know, get away from the noise. People talked about, you know, sleep being interrupted, that sort of thing. We know from the health about how the cardiovascular system is really affected by noise. And another aspect of that really concerns me is that even if we say, oh, well, you get used to it, you know, I've lived here X amount of time, I'm used to it. You might psychologically have got used to it, but actually physiologically, your body is still affected. And what we need when our body, our heart is affected in that way, and the stress in our, you know, our we need those green spaces, and we need that calm and that tranquility. And actually one of the other effects of this application seems to be that our green spaces will actually become noisier, and more of the green spaces will be affected. That's public green spaces, not just talking about our own private gardens and things like that, because regardless of what you do with noise, obviously there's nothing we can do, or very little. I acknowledge what Councillor Bicknell was talking about, some things that they're doing, I think, at Schiphol Airport and things like that. But at the moment, you know, there's very little that we can do in that way. I have been on the phone to residents in Campbell Road when a plane has gone overhead, and not only is there obviously the noise impact, which I can hear on the phone, but actually the resident I was speaking to actually does find it incredibly distressing, and it was very clear from her reaction how that was impacting on her. Councillor, sorry, I've forgotten my colleague's name then. Councillor Craig yesterday, she talked about the Channel Islands, and it's absolutely vital, you know, that connection, and that is really important. But I think she felt able to support the application. I think there are a lot of health disbenefits, if I put it that way, that do sort of concern me. Having said that, I recognise that actually an airport, and I think it might have been Councillor Bicknell who talked about this today, airports themselves, you know, going off, going to new places, seeing the world, travel, you know, that is incredibly important as well. There is a value to our health to doing that. The community fund, I must admit, I struggle with that. I am really concerned about the impact on people's health of the noise, and I just don't feel that £2 per flight over a certain limit of flights, which is going to take a very long time to build up to, you know, any sum of any sort of value. I really struggle to see how that is actually going to do anything meaningful for the people living in that sort of very worst affected area. So yeah, I've got some sort of doubts around that. In terms of the roads, this is what I am sorry, I just put my hands up and say this to me is the craziest thing that I have ever heard. We have junctions that are, it's acknowledged, that are over capacity, that are struggling already. We have an air quality management area. We have, I'm not obsessed with Southampton Road. I know people were saying there are more roads than Southampton Road. I do get that. The reason I hone in on that one is because Southampton Road is part of the air quality management area. And we know that a couple of the sites, Southampton, I think they're called Southampton 1 and Southampton 2, that the air quality in those areas is a concern, and one of them particularly is not going down in the way that we would sort of want it to do. And to me, if you've got junctions that are struggling with capacity, that means you put more cars on the road coming up to those junctions, although the system may be able to work in that, yes, it does, you know, people manage to get ultimately where they want to go. Actually, it takes longer, and while you're sat in traffic and it's taking longer, you're pumping out all your exhaust fumes, and that to me, it's stressful to be in congestion. The number of times I see people put things on social media about, you know, building houses, but you don't build the infrastructure, you know, people really struggle with that already. I do fully accept that the Highways Authority, they have said that they don't think it's a problem, but I did read the Highways reports, and there were quite a number of reports. I think it was on maybe the 4th or 5th one where they actually went to a, okay, we're happy, or whatever you say in technical terms, but essentially that's what they said. But there was quite a lot of concern up to that point, and I believe Southampton City Council, they were very concerned about the sort of road network. So, but to me it just seems crazy, but hey, I put my hands up, and better people than me sort of have adjudicated on that one. And then that takes me finally to the environment and climate change. And quite a lot of the debate tonight has quite rightly, in my opinion, been focused around that. We have declared a climate emergency here, and well, I should say not just a climate emergency, we've declared a climate and environment emergency. And if we take the decision tonight to go with officer recommendation, then we tonight will be agreeing to 370,000 tonnes of emissions. That will be down to us doing that. That's how I interpret that. And some of my colleagues may be happy with that. That's for everyone to make their own decision. But I'm clear that those emissions will only take place if we make the decision tonight to go with officer recommendation. So where do you go with all of that? And I think for me, part of the challenge is that we have a tendency to look at all of these things in isolation. And actually, I think we have to look at all of these things in the actual context. And the context is that we have experienced a global pandemic, which is more than likely going to lead to a global recession. And we're dealing with a climate emergency. And people want to make this really simple, and it's an either this or that. And I don't think it's like that. It is really, really important to save people's livelihoods. That is absolutely clear. And at the same time, it is really important to recognise we are in a climate emergency. We need to demonstrate real leadership here. Yes, this is a global situation, and no, the Eastleigh Local Area Committee cannot solve the problems of the world. I wish we could, but what we can do is play our part, and we can act, you know, take that leadership role. Because in my mind, we've got two really difficult problems here. And for me, it's which is the harder problem to solve. And for me, the harder problem to solve is climate change. That is where I think we need to be really serious. We need to honour the commitments that we have made. We don't have time to wait. I believe that those technologies that people were talking about, Councillor Bicknell has talked a lot about those technologies. I think they will come, absolutely. This country is incredibly creative and innovative. I have huge confidence in this country, but I don't believe they will come quick enough. And the Climate Change Committee have sort of indicated that yes, all those things will help, but actually what we really fundamentally need to be doing, each and every one of us in every way that we can, we need to reduce our carbon emissions. We need to do it as individuals, we need to do it as communities, neighbours, countries, and so on and so forth. And I think the timescale that we're looking at it's just completely wrong. We shouldn't be thinking about what's right for the next couple of years, for the next 6 years, however long the recession is going to be. We have to take the decisions that are right, not just for our children and our grandchildren, but we should be thinking 5 generations ahead as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, hopefully that might have given my fellow colleagues something to sort of think about. I don't know if I've disappointed you or pleased you or whatever, but so Councillor Bourne, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your insight. And you know, I think you've mirrored a lot of things I was saying, that it's a push and pull, etc. But one thing I have been thinking about is our decision and the impact it can have. So our decision can make a tiny impact on climate change. It can make a massive influence over local jobs and the local economy, especially in times of pandemic. So, you know, I'm not dismissing the climate change and environment at all. I just think our decision can have a much bigger impact on the local economy and local jobs than it can on the environment. And, you know, our residents, you know, I'm sure if you gave them a choice, would rather have jobs than do a little bit for the environment. But that's not disregarding the environment. But I feel quite strongly that that the opportunity to save and create jobs for our, you know, for our residents is something that we just, yeah, we shouldn't pass up. But thank you, Chair.
I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Bourne, that we can't dismiss jobs, and I think jobs are incredibly important. What I would say is that it's not a choice between one or the other, that actually I know that we are determining a planning application here tonight, and the tendency is that we could go all over the place. But I think that actually the central government has a really incredibly important role to play here, and that actually we can choose to invest in those the green economy, and actually we can do the things that are right for the planet. We can do the things that are right for well-being, because actually economic growth is only valuable to the extent that it supports the well-being of people and it supports the long-term sustainability of the planet. So I think central government needs to step up, and it needs to start. I mean, it was only last week or the week before that the Public Accounts Committee, so, you know, not the most revolutionary of bodies, but the Public Accounts Committee said, I wrote this down earlier, the government lacks a plan for how it will achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, despite setting the target almost 2 years ago. So anyway, I'm now going to take off my individual councillor hat, and I'm going to put my chair's hat back on, and we are going to resume with Councillor Bicknell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with some of the points that you mentioned in your summing up there, Chair, and also Councillor Bourne. And I just want to put a point across. I mean, I think most of us have pretty much decided how we're going to vote and what our thoughts are and the reasoning for it. None of us are climate deniers. We're all passionate about the climate, just because we have a different view as to how climate should be, in the case of this application, you know, controlled. That doesn't mean to say that we're climate deniers. And I'm certainly not suggesting that anyone on this committee is a climate denier. You know, we have different views. As I've made very clear, I think my view is the fact that we refuse this application. The airport will close eventually, unless something miraculous happens. And actually, the emissions that we've saved will just be eaten up in a different part of the country. And it will make no overall difference, and that's my view. That doesn't mean to say that I don't believe that aviation needs to reduce its carbon. It definitely does, as does lots of other industries. However, I agree with Councillor Bourne that because we will make such a we will set a principle, or I don't know, what's the word, set an example. Yeah, an example with very little actual benefit. At the end of the day, it becomes somebody else's problem somewhere else in the country, and what have you. But hey, we've set an example. Yeah, it doesn't help the problem. But I think actually coming out of a pandemic, I think we can do more for the job side of things, which, you know, obviously we had a number of representatives from trade unions who know who know a thing or two about employment, speaking in favour yesterday for that very reason, and that. So yeah. Anyway, I'm sort of, you know, going over old ground, and that. And I think you're actually right that individually we can all make a difference. Because as individuals, we can stop driving our petrol cars. We can stop flying, and that. At the end of the day, whether people do, it's up to individuals at the end of the day. But individually, yes, you know. But again, of course, collectively in this country, we need 60 million people to actually do that, and that. But anyway. Yeah, I am passionate. You know, we're all passionate about the environment. We just show it in different ways, and we have a slightly different mythology as to how we think it should be dealt with. But But for members of the public, and if that attendees box on the top left is anything to go by, there's 299 people potentially watching us at this particular moment in time. Just because some of us are minded to support this application does not mean that we are climate change deniers, and it does not mean that we should not be in our positions of responsibility because we have slightly different thoughts on how to deal with climate change than other people. So anyway, I'd like to thank all my fellow councillors for taking part in the debate, which has been fair and fun, generally good humoured, emotive, given the subject, hardly a surprise, and onwards and upwards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bicknell. So if no one else wishes to speak, now is your last opportunity, because I'm going to ask Laura to take us to the vote, please, Laura.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, you are voting for the officer recommendation in the report. When I call your name, please signal how you would like to vote. Sorry, to Councillor, the recommendation as amended by Andy Granfield at the start of the presentation. So again, as I call your name, please indicate how you would like to vote. Councillor Bicknell.
In favour of permit.
Councillor Bourne.
For.
Councillor Campbell.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Doogie.
Against.
Councillor Irish. Councillor Irish.
Against.
Councillor Mann.
For.
And Councillor Tyson Payne. Councillor Tyson Payne.
I'm sorry, against. Did you not hear?
No,
Sorry.
That's 5 against, Chair, and 3 for. So the recommendation is lost.
Okay, thank you for that, Laura. So the recommendation to permit has not been passed. This indicates that the ELAC committee wishes to take a decision contrary to the recommendation of the Head of Housing and Development. In accordance with our constitution, this matter will now be referred to full council for determination. This is because this is considered to be a matter of borough-wide significance. Sorry, I need to put my glasses on so I can read this last bit. And the date of that council meeting will be the 8th of April. So I would just like to thank everyone again for, and I really this time, because the one person or group of people I didn't thank previously really was my fellow councillors on ELAC. And I would just like to commend you all for your very passionate, engaged debate this evening. I think you really made sure that you engaged with all the issues, and we've obviously come to a conclusion this evening. Yes, so there we are. And thank you to everybody who's watching at home, and I think I've probably said enough, and it's time to say good night.
Good night.
Councillors, can I please ask you to hang on just for a few moments longer?